Hi there. I'm Mark. I'll be your instructor for the day for I think this is our first React lecture. So excited to kind of get into that. React Phase 2 is my favorite part, I think, of the program. It's really satisfying to go from doing everything by hand, which is important to understand, to finding or learning more efficient ways to do stuff. So yeah, um, this is not my lecture plan. I'm just going to go off of Steven's stuff. I'm, I'm usually pretty loose with it, but I'm going to follow his outline so you all are on sync with him. But if y'all have any questions at all during this, or need me to explain something different, or need to ask anything at all, just interrupt. Just say, "Hey, I've got a question." You can post it in chat. You can raise a hand. Um, Sometimes not great at seeing hands up, so get my attention whatever way works for you. So y'all did JavaScript for the last 3 weeks. How's that feeling in general?
Feels good, I would say. I think that a lot of it is a lot of information at once, and then I think each of us handled our own challenges pretty differently. We had unique challenges with our projects. So
Mhm.
from person to person, I feel like you talk to one person, they'll be more comfortable about one thing, and other
Yeah.
people more comfortable about other things. And there's still, for me at least, a lot of stuff it feels like I'm just scratching the surface. And even while doing research for the project, there was more and more stuff that I was uncovering that I didn't know about that were even options. Like I didn't even know it was an option, let alone knew about it to the level where I feel I'm confident in it. So still a lot,
Mhm.
but I'm gaining confidence as I go. So
Yeah,
yeah.
there's 1 billion things to know. I still learn new stuff about JavaScript all the time. Uh, they keep updating JavaScript, so there's always new stuff to learn. But yeah, that's you're never gonna know 100% of stuff all the time. That's why we have Google. Cool. Did y'all do solo projects or did you do them in pairs or teams?
We did them in pairs.
Cool, 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 cool. So yeah, so let's talk a little bit about uh, why we're doing React in the first place at all, I guess. So main reason, React is really popular still. There are tons of front end frameworks. Uh, there's React, Angular, um, Svelte, Vue, tons of stuff. They all do not exactly the same thing, but basically the same thing. They abstract a lot of the stuff that we've been doing by hand. So I don't know how you all managed things like adding a new element to your DOM, or making similar requests, or oh, I need to add a certain kind of event listener to a button. In general, when I'm showing that off or doing it myself, I'll write a function. I'll if I need to, even like doing a document get element by ID, I'll usually make a little function called like EL or something. It's a one-line function that does exactly the same thing. It's just a little bit cleaner to type. Or if I'm adding a new element instead of every single time typing document element, document get element by ID, this element, create this kind of element, attach it to the element, put this kind of stuff in it. It's only 3 or 4 lines, but it's if you're writing the same 3 or 4 lines over and over again, or even more than once, sometimes it makes sense to write a function that will encapsulate that behavior. So both so you don't have to type all that stuff every time, which reduces the surface area that you can introduce errors into, but it's also easier to read. If I wrote a function called add element, and it takes the parent element, uh, the kind of element and what's in it, like I know from that add element to the thing function, I can just read that and see what's happening instead of having to parse through 3, 4, 5 lines of JavaScript and be like, oh yeah, I know what that is. So I have like my three rules of programming that I always give people. Rule one, make it work. As long as it works, you're good. Rule two, make it easy to understand or think about. And I think it's definitely in rule two category of programmer time is way more expensive and valuable than computer time. So anything you can do to make your life easier or the people that you're working with easier, the people on your team, the people working on your code easier, that's going to save you so much time and mental effort. More importantly, mental effort and stress. Um, and you know, 6 months down the road, you are that someone else sometimes. So making things easier for yourself is always good. Abstraction is great. Um, Writing functions to abstract stuff like that is great. And so that's where React and Angular and all these libraries come from, is not just because someone said, hey, I want to make this thing. Someone was saying, hey, I do this thing over and over and over again. I'm going to make it easier for myself. And hey, look, it's useful for other people too. So um, the big benefit of React, I guess, over vanilla JavaScript is that it's easier to understand and it's faster to write. Uh, and it's really, it makes things, once you write some code in this certain idiom, it makes it understandable for a lot more people. You can write your vanilla JavaScript, and everyone's vanilla JavaScript is probably going to look different. If you're writing React code, everyone's React is going to be different, but there are similar bits so that if you give someone else your React code, they can be like, ah, I see what you're doing here a lot more easily. So that's kind of like the basic why. Um, the yeah, I won't go too much more into that. So, what is React? When we write stuff in React, it looks like we're writing JavaScript and HTML, and kind of are, kind of not. What we're doing is writing code that's transpiled into JavaScript, HTML, and all that stuff. Um, Transpiling means that we're taking, it's like compiling, but instead of taking something and turning it into something else entirely, we're taking the stuff that kind of looks like the stuff that we want to make and changing it a little bit into the stuff we want to make. Things like TypeScript, same thing. It's TypeScript is a way to make your JavaScript more strongly typed and theoretically less prone to errors, and it's turned into actual JavaScript, even though what you're writing looks like JavaScript. So same kind of thing with React, and having that sort of mental model is definitely going to help when you are debugging. When you're like, why isn't this working? This JavaScript works. Sometimes it's because you're not writing JavaScript. You're writing React that gets turned into JavaScript, and that might behave a little bit differently than you used to. And same thing with the JSX. JSX is the stuff in the angle brackets that looks very, very much like HTML that we use to generate the HTML in React. But clearly, there are things in React that we've added to that markup to do things that you can't do in HTML. Have our curly brackets to put in variables and stuff. We a lot of things. So keep in mind if you are getting errors that don't seem like they should be errors in HTML, just remember you're not writing HTML, you're writing JSX that gets turned into HTML. But at the end of the day, all it is doing is generating CSS, HTML, and JavaScript exactly the way that you've been writing by hand. So there's nothing magic about it. It's just a different way of writing the same stuff that you've been writing this entire time. Do y'all have, I know it's real early in the week and you haven't had a lot of time to look at the material yet. Do y'all have any questions for me about like the high level conceptual or abstract stuff about React that I can help refine a little bit before we start getting into specifics?
Actually, I think I do have a question.
There you
Sorry, it
go.
just came really late.
You're good.
In the material, it mentions that this is kind of kept up by Facebook.
Hmm.
Was it initially developed by them as a way to kind of add logic to what probably was a really manual process?
Yeah, yeah. The library definitely did come from Facebook. It is, I'm pretty sure it is still maintained by uh, people from Facebook. The the code is all on GitHub. You can actually look at how it's implemented. Uh, but yeah, it's to the best of my knowledge. I haven't looked in a while. It is updated by engineers in Facebook, but also it's not exactly open source, but it is open-ish. So there's a lot of contributors from everywhere. Does that answer what you're asking?
Yeah, that's great. I think I was just
Yeah.
interested about how it came about, and
Yeah.
especially after doing a project week one and learning about this, seeing how manual and imperative my code was
Hmm.
for like me and my partner, Chimmy, he's on here, rendered basically a table. So we had multiple cells that we gave different names, and now seeing React being like, oh man, that could have been like 3 lines.
Yeah.
It makes
Yeah.
sense why, and to see how someone could have chosen to simplify it and add some logic in there.
Yeah, for sure. Um, yeah, it is a little infuriating when you get directed, like, why weren't we doing this the entire time? I think it's really important to understand how the stuff works under the hood before doing it the easy way. And there are many, many layers of abstractions we're working with. You can go all the way down, and at some point we need to figure out where to stop. And I think JavaScript is a good place to stop. And React is all like it feels like it does a lot of stuff by magic, but it is all written in JavaScript. You can go and look at the code again and see how React is written. Look at the JavaScript code that makes React run. It's very complex, but you can definitely look at it and be like, oh, I understand some of this and kind of get a feel for what it is. And as you get more advanced, you can go and debug, or you can even submit pull requests to the project eventually, if you like. And I think you mentioned something else that's really interesting about the imperative nature of JavaScript versus the more declarative nature of React. Um, Anyone want to take a shot at what like imperative versus declarative means?
I mean, are you asking for what Flatiron defined it as? Because we had it was kind of defined out, laid out for us in one of the modules that
Yeah,
we
yeah,
did. I mean, so imperative versus declarative. Imperative is like explicitly describing the actions the program should take every
mhm,
single step of the way. So kind of like with the using Dylan's grid example, you would declare exactly how you want that grid built out and every step of the way. And then declarative is just describing what the program should accomplish, kind of what the end result should be, and then
yep,
leaving the program to do that.
yeah,
So
exactly.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah. The
I read
imperative,
that
yeah,
so they didn't really do
go
that.
for it.
So
Yeah, yeah, you're good. Yeah, and definitely like computer scientists like to use big words. Imperative just means it's going step by step, line by line, following the recipe or those instructions. And declarative is more telling like this is what I want the end thing to look like. Be smart enough to figure that out. And React is definitely more on the declarative side. You will be writing JavaScript functions to do stuff, so there's a lot of imperative stuff still in there. There are entire languages that are strictly declarative or having declarative bits in them that are really interesting. We won't be looking at any of those languages here, unfortunately, but there's a lot of cool stuff there. So yeah, so basically and this is like one of the main conceptual shifts that's hard to make using not just React but other frameworks that have this declarative kind of way about them is even if we did spend 3 weeks just doing JavaScript line by line, we do have, I think, the inclination to say, do this, then do this, then do this, then do this. Uh, it just feels like a natural way. Instead of just saying, like, I want your thing to look like this when it's done, figure it out. And for me, at least, definitely when I was learning React or Angular or whatever, there was still a struggle to want to tell stuff step by step instead of doing things in the way that it gives you tools to do. So especially early on, sometimes if you feel like you're struggling against something, it's often that you're struggling to write things imperatively rather than just accepting the declarative nature of React, going with it. Any other questions kind of about overall stuff before we jump into more
Yeah,
details?
I actually thought of one, and you've kind of been using them interchangeably, but like
Mhm.
libraries versus like frameworks,
Mm,
is that a difference? I know that they said
yeah.
React is more of a framework and some of the other ones are more, or React's more of a library.
Yes.
Some of the other ones are more frameworks. I've been mixing up words in my,
Yeah, you're good.
yeah, I don't know. I just, they didn't really go into any detail there,
Yeah,
and you've used them interchangeably. So
yeah. So a framework is more of a, we don't teach Rails anymore, but a framework is more of a setup. Angular is more of a front end framework. A framework is more, hey, we're going to give you this structure. And if you put things into this structure and name them the right way and call your functions the right things, a lot of this heavy lifting is going to be taken care of for you. Um, Front end and back end, same things. If you name your component files a certain way, they're going to be picked up and made available this way. On the back end, if you name your Ruby on Rails class this way, we're going to automatically know that it's a thing, and we're going to do a lot of automatic database stuff for you. Uh, so a framework is, and there are two different like philosophies, right? A framework is we have a specific idea about what an application should look like. Fill in our structure, and stuff will work for you. React is not like that. React is a library, which basically means that we've given you a toolbox of things to use, put them together however you like. You don't have to name things certain ways. You don't have to put things in certain places. It's up to you to wire stuff together. Basically, there's a basic skeleton we're going to give you, but you can even change that if you want to. So React gives you a lot of freedom and flexibility, which I tend to prefer. I'm like 60/40. I tend to prefer that a little bit, uh, but it does take more. There's more of a learning curve to it. There are more things that you need to understand before you can really understand why you're plugging things together in a certain way. Whereas like the learning curve for React is kind of like a big hump kind of. There's a lot of stuff to learn up front, but as you learn it, the possibilities open up really nicely. Whereas a library, whereas with like more strict frameworks, the learning curve is a little bit easier. It's easier to get stuff up and running. I can just plug things in here, and then I've got a blog all of a sudden in 5 minutes, which is great for demos or great for spinning up prototypes. But once you start trying to do things that framework is not necessarily designed to do, there's a lot more customization, a lot more effort, a lot more digging. So frameworks, the general rule, general, I don't know, not a rule, the general thing is that frameworks kind of give you a lot of tools to make things look like the framework really easily. And then when you want to divert from that uh, structure, there's a lot more work you have to do. Whereas libraries give you a lot of tools up front. You need to learn how to use those tools to build your thing. But once you do, you've got a lot of freedom. Yeah. Does that make any sense?
yeah, I think it does. Very conceptual, but
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
that that makes sense. I'm sure it'll make even more sense as we dive in. So
Yeah, for sure. Other questions? All right. Yeah. Um, yeah. Let me pop open a terminal and we'll talk about some code stuff. Just share that screen. I'm just share everything. Just share everything. I'm gonna pop open. Let me move some stuff around here so you don't have to look at all my stuff. There's that. There's that. So many windows. Okay, cool. Go ahead and share your screen here. Desktop one. Cool. So let's go ahead and start up a React thing. So um, not a framework, but it does give you, there are tools that are written to set up kind of a skeleton for you in React. So create React app. Oh, they changed it, right? We can create a new React project by using this another npm module called create React app. We used to just be able to install it as a command. Now you have to run it through npm, and the way we run it through npm is actually by doing npx, which means kind of like remotely execute this. So we're going to do a create React app, and we'll call it a demo. And if everything works, it should go through a bunch of stuff, download a bunch of things, and it will install a bunch of stuff in our demo directory and create a project called demo. You're going to see a lot of things that you probably don't understand in there. Babel is one of them. Babel is the transpiler. Babel is the thing that turns our React code and our JSX into our HTML and JavaScript. And I'll kind of like walk through the general structure of everything as we go. There's a lot of stuff to it, so depending on how snappy your computer and or connection are, 34 seconds, not bad. Sometimes this can take a little bit. If it's taking way too long, check your connection. You may see, I'm sure you've seen this already, vulnerabilities and updates and stuff. Usually you can ignore those. Don't feel the need to do an audit fix every time, but it's just informational. So let's see what we got. Here's our demo. Great. I'm going to open this up. This code deciding to work today. Sometimes it takes a little nudge. There we go. Great. So thank you. So here is our React project. These are all the things that it gives you by default. And by default, it gives you a cool little demo project, which you can start up. Basically, the README has all the things you need to start learning it. npm start is the thing you're going to be doing most of the time. Their documentation is fantastic here at reactjs.org. Outstanding documentation, I think. I'm not going to say it's better than the curriculum. I'm not going to say that, but it is definitely very, very useful for sure. So when you need to look things up, it's going to be everything there. But to start up our application, I'm just going to do our npm start. And so let me hit the button and then I'll talk about, yeah, Dane, what's up?
Just really quickly, you want us to install this and follow along, right? Just with this demo, or are we just watching you for right now?
Yeah, you can if you like. It is not required to do so. Different people learn different ways. So if it's useful for you to follow along, please do so. This will be recorded, so you can always follow along later. Or if it's more useful to you to just kind of sit back and absorb it and then play with it on your own, also great. Yeah, whatever works best for you is the best way to do it. Great question though. Thank you for asking. So here is our demo app. that we get when it runs successfully. So we can see here that it's actually fired up another server. So we can look at files in a browser just by opening them, but we're actually starting up a web server here locally. So we're actually running stuff on localhost 3000. Just like when you were running a JSON server before to grab data, same kind of thing, different purpose. Were you using like light server or live server or anything to view your HTML projects in phase one?
We use live server.
Cool. Yeah. Yeah. Same thing. Live server fires up a server that serves web pages. This is firing up a React development server that's running on port 3000. Again, a server is just a program that runs, listens on a port for connections, and then does things in response. So in our case, what it's actually doing is when it gets a response, we've transpiled this code already. I don't think, yeah, it doesn't make a build directory by default. But when it gets a response, it goes through and changes the stuff it needs into JavaScript and HTML and serves it out. So we can look at that at localhost 3000 and look at that. It opened it up for us. Got a nice little CSS transition to make it rotate. You got that. So that is your basic structure of your React application. Let's walk through exactly what's going on here first. Yeah, don't need to worry about that. So the place that it opens up from by default is it looks at this index HTML, which you should be familiar with what an index HTML looks like. This one in particular, the main thing it's looking for is this root ID. All this is just an empty div with the ID of root, nothing else special about it at all. You could make it a paragraph. You could put it somewhere else. You could embed a little React application somewhere else in your page. All this is doing is saying, hey, this is a div called root. And that's important because by default, this index.js is the thing that kicks off by default here. And all it's doing is saying, hey, we're going to grab that root element and we're going to say, hey, React DOM specifically, we want to create a React root object from that. And once we have that, we're going to render stuff into it, and that will be what's displayed on the page. A lot of things happening in this little bit here. I don't remember how much they go into it in the curriculum. Does anyone know why there's two parts to React, and React DOM? Any guesses?
I remember reading a little bit about it, but I can't remember exactly.
Yeah. So the React part is the React engine. That's the part that maintains state. It does a lot of things that are core to React. It knows how to pass props down to a thing. It knows how to do events and all the standard stuff. React DOM is actually the way that we hook that React core up to our HTML page, into the DOM in HTML and JavaScript. Why is it important to separate those two things out? There are other things you can hook the React core up to. If you want to make a mobile app, there's a React. Oh, my mind just blanked. React. It's not React Mobile. It's React. Wow, just went blank. Basically, there are different things that you can hook React up to. So if you want to make a mobile app, there's I'm just gonna Google it right now because that's
Is
my brain
it React Native?
React Native, that's the one. Yes, thank you. React Native is the thing that hooks up React to the front end of a mobile app. There are other ones that these are the two big ones that people use. But basically, it's just separating that core React functionality from the way that we're displaying that functionality and interacting with it. So theoretically, you can write all of your core functionality in React and then just write a different front end for it for a mobile app and use the same logic. We're not going to worry about any of that here. We're just going to, that's just a conceptual thing. That's why there's two bits of React. And since React DOM is the thing that interacts with our JavaScript DOM, that's the thing that we're using to hook up React to that. And so create root, that's the thing that's saying, hey, we're using React with this particular part of our web page. Render, that's the thing that puts the stuff on the web page. So we can see here that render is a function that, or a method really, that runs off of React DOM object in JavaScript. JavaScript is an object-oriented language. It's arguably more object-oriented than Python, but don't tell anyone that. But so render is a method on the React DOM object here that we attach to our root. So what does it do? It does what it says on the label. It renders stuff into the element that we've made our root. We kind of glossed past that strict mode thing, but the important thing is the app here. So this is a component. The stuff that you're going to see in JSX, and this is JSX. JSX is just something that looks like HTML, but that is hooked into React's core functionality. That's going to eventually be turned into HTML. And so basically we're saying, if we kind of ignore this part and this part, basically what we're saying is, hey, we've got this thing that we grabbed from our HTML page here. We're going to find this component. We're going to find out what it creates, and whatever it creates, we're going to render into that there. And that's what puts things on the page. And yeah. So yeah, and this is another one of those things that like, it's easy to kind of demo and do a little tutorial and be like, see, it works. I think understanding conceptually exactly what's happening is going to help you out a lot in the long run for development debugging. So a couple little tricks that React is hiding here. It looks like we have an HTML element called app here that we're putting on our page. And that's going to basically replace this or put it, does it replace it or does it put it inside? That's a great question. Let's find out. It's going to, so here's our, yeah, it puts it inside. So here's our div, our root div, same as on our page here. In fact, if we, you know, say class equals whatever, that should also show up there. Hey, look at that. Blah, blah, blah. So this is literally just the HTML that's getting, that the stuff is being rendered into. And this is all the stuff that's being put into it. So app is returning all of this stuff. So we're in the app component. A component is just a chunk of stuff that you're going to render into it. And more specifically, this looks like HTML. It just happens to be an HTML thing that we're defining ourselves in our app JS over here. We'll talk about in a second. But really, since this is JSX, this is not an HTML element. This is actually a function. And we can see that it's a function here. So index is pulling in app. We're importing this module here from app.js, and that's giving us this function. And so when we import app from app.js and use it here in the context of JSX, we're saying, hey, React, take this function called app that we defined here, run it, whatever that function returns, put it in the thing you're rendering into. And so whatever app returns, all this stuff. So it's just returning what looks very much like HTML. It's just returning this stuff and rendering it into this element that we got here. So we're taking all this stuff, returning it from app, inserting it into our HTML, and that's how we get all this stuff in there. And that is the basic, like that is one of the basic core things that React is for. That's why it was made. Um, so we can break our application down into these components and put them together like that. And I think like 50% of understanding React is understanding exactly what's happening there. I'd learned on the street. Hopefully this will make it easier for you. Any kind of questions about that part? I think it's really fundamental to learn that gets skipped over a lot. Or if you have any questions as we go forward, feel free to interrupt. Yeah, so let's look at the app.js for a second. We're inputting a graphic, we're inputting some CSS, but the important part is we've written this function and it's returning this JSX. And again, this looks exactly, almost exactly like HTML. There's a giveaway that tells us that it's not really HTML. Can anyone see what it is? Just in lines, like 6 to 20 there, 21. What's different from this? What's different in this from regular HTML? It's a little clue.
Is it the lines that aren't closed in tags, like the line 18, the learn React?
Nope, you can do that in regular HTML. That's just putting text inside of a tag. Is there a class name in HTML like that? Spoiler alert, there is not. Like I said, JavaScript is a object-oriented language. And one of the things that you need to do is make a class and call it, dog, whatever. And when you make a new JavaScript class, you use the keyword class. And so we can't use the keyword class here because this is all JavaScript. It looks exactly like HTML almost, but everything inside here, everything in JSX is actually JavaScript. Why does it look like HTML? Great question. Because we want to write stuff that looks like HTML. Like here, this looks like HTML. If there was an app element in HTML, there is not. So we write our own. And so just like what we're doing here, this is saying run the app function that you're grabbing and take everything that is returning and putting it into this element here. When we're using JSX to return stuff from that, it's not returning what we've written here. If we just have, simplify it. If we just have return hello, that should change over here. Everything's working right. Hello. Yeah, there we go. We can see that it's put in just our div here, over here. Hello. Or if we want to make it a H1. Same thing. Boom. Hello. So it is taking whatever's in this app, rendering it out, and putting it in the thing. So again, this looks like HTML. Knowing what we know about this, what's actually happening here? Any guesses? What is H1 here? Is that an HTML tag?
Yes, it is an HTML.
Really?
Sure.
I
Is it actually a
disagree.
create element?
Um, Basically, yeah. So built into React, React DOM specifically, there are a bunch of functions named after all of the um, HTML elements. They're not exactly the same as the components we'll write. They're slightly different in ways that don't really matter to us. But H1 is actually a function. This is actually a function that looks kind of like, you know, function H1 stuff, and then it returns HTML that looks like uh, probably H1 uh, plus whatever is rendered by it, like that. So H1 is actually a function. And since we are writing JSX here, uh, it knows to say, hey, if you see something in angle brackets that looks like an HTML element, that's actually a function. Run the function that does that and put whatever it returns inside there. If you're returning that, it's going to put that inside there, and so on and so on. So when we look at our original stuff here, each one of these is actually a function. There's a div function, there's a header function, there's an image function, there's a p function, there's a bold function, there's a strong function, there's a table function, um, all the stuff. These are actually functions that return the HTML that we're asking for here. And all of these attributes that we're looking at in the JSX, those are not actually HTML element attributes. Those are arguments to our function. So if we have our div function, whatever, I'm going to call it props. Whatever is in props. So if we have props class name, that is going to be app. That's going to be a thing that is passed in as an argument to that function, basically. More or less. We'll get more into that, what that means later when we write our own. But so the main thing to remember is that when you are writing JSX, you are not writing HTML. You are writing functions in a different way that are returning things that will give us HTML in the end. That's understanding that, again, is going to help a lot with debugging and whatnot. For the most part, you don't have to think about it. That's the entire reason we have this library. We write stuff that looks like HTML so we don't have to think about the functions underneath. And we saw the functions underneath in phase one. There, grab the thing, make a new element, put the thing in there, attach it, all that stuff. This is just a function that abstracts that. So, like I was saying at the beginning, if we have a function that is a function adding it to the parent, and so we're going to go. It's going to be the parent ID. We're going to do documents, get element by ID, get element by ID, parent ID, and then we're going to give us our element is going to be a create element, etc. And we're going to append it, and so on. And we're going to put stuff inside. This is basically what all of these functions do. So it's doing that work for you. So you don't have to do that, which you've already done 3 weeks of. You don't need to do it anymore. Cool. So that is the purpose of JSX, is to take stuff that looks like HTML, but are actually functions, run those functions, some of which you will define yourself, and turn it into HTML and put it in your page there. It's a lot of work under the hood done for you that you don't have to do yourself. Yeah, I think that's enough theory there. Any questions about any of all that stuff? It's kind of abstract, but hopefully you'll get your fingers when you start working on it. questions about how it's not really HTML. Great. So
Oh, sorry, actually, I have a question.
yeah, great. Awesome.
Is it just like essentially automatically appending it based off of the order that it's input?
Yeah, yeah. So if we look at this, inside this header, this is creating a, just makes it wrong. This is this is running the image function that returns some HTML that's going to be appended to that header. Same thing. P is running a function called P that's returning HTML that's going to append it to the header after our image. Same thing with the A, same thing with this text here. So yeah, it's just running these functions in order and attaching them in order, appending them to the parent element. Is that what you're asking?
Yes, thank you.
Cool, cool. Awesome.
Or actually, also then if you
Yeah.
wanted something to like be a sibling, would you just do it outside the like finished tag, or would it need to be
So if you wanted like another, like
in?
I want a nav up here.
Or like if you wanted to have like a sibling to div or header, or I
Oh,
guess like, or I guess,
that's
yeah, a sibling to header, then yeah.
yeah. Actually, that's a great question. So short answer is yes. um, if you just write it like HTML, it's going to mostly work out like that. So if you want a sibling to header, put it before, put it after, and it should work the way that you mostly expect it to work. If you want to do something here, image source equals blah blah blah. This is and you need to do right. Do that right. Oh, it's giving me red. I know it's giving me red.
It's image and image.
Sorry.
You had image spelled one way in the first half, and then
Oh
typed out
yeah,
image on the back half.
yeah. But it's still giving me red. Any any ideas why?
Yeah, it's because you can actually only have one line returned. So the
Yeah,
image and the div are two lines.
yeah. So basically, again, what's happening under the hood here is what they said is we can only return one thing, which makes sense because you can only return one thing from a function. So here, it, if it was just taking it at face value, it'd be saying like, oh, return image and then return div. And you can't return two different things from a function. So what you would want to do if you need two things like that, you would either wrap it in a div if you were a monster, and so you'll have a parent there. Um, I'm a big proponent of semantic HTML, which means that everything has a meaning. If you just have a wrapper div that doesn't mean anything, that breaks my heart. So instead, you can just use an empty tag. And that's basically just a grouping tag that says, hey, I know we can only return one thing, but I need to return more than one thing. So just group them in this one empty tag. There's a special React name for them that escapes me at the moment. But basically, if you
Actually,
do need
just
to
read
return,
this one.
what's it called?
I just read it. It's the React fragment.
Say that again.
React fragment. Is that what it's called?
Fragments. Yes, that's what it's called.
Okay. Yeah, just read that module. So
Yeah.
it's fresh.
Thank you. Yeah, these are fragments. Basically, they're just empty containers that won't add anything to it. So if we want to do like, oh, here's our H1, blah, 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 and here's a paragraph that has some other text in it, and we put it in a fragment. When we get it out here, here's our H1, here's our thing, here's our div that we're putting stuff into. It's not including any element for the fragment. So it's just rendering out those two things next to each other as separate elements in the HTML here. So if you do need to add two things like that, there's a way to do it. Thank you for reminding me of that. That's great. Dane,
Is
yeah.
there a, oh, sorry.
How you doing? Go ahead. Anyone go? Yeah, you start talking.
No, you're good. I just had a question. If you could, is there a limit to how many you can put in in that fragment?
Nope, you can put 10,000 if you want.
Cool, thanks.
So,
Yeah. So let's say that with the image, where I thought that was going was, could you make a function that was image and then make a function that was like the app and then put image inside of the function app?
and that's exactly what's happening here, right? Um, we've made a component called app,
Yeah.
and that actually has an image inside of it, a little bit deeper
Okay.
inside. Yeah. So
Yeah. What I'm
yeah.
saying is like you can do you go if you go back to the index.js
hmm
really quickly, or yeah, or and then it has app there, like the bracket app slash.
Yeah. You can do like image source equals whatever here.
Or you could do like image slash and then make a function that was image, like called image.
Oh yeah. So if you had like
Remember that?
image, and then you pass it some stuff. Yeah, you could do that. You would need
Yeah.
to wrap this in a fragment,
Yeah.
so you could do it like that.
Okay. So you would still need to wrap it up there,
Yeah.
even
Yeah.
though that was okay. That's kind of where I was getting with my question was like if I did that, would I have to wrap it in fragment?
Yep.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah.
Understood.
Yeah. Render and returns. You can only return one thing. So
Okay.
if
Even
you
with the render,
yeah, yeah,
the
yeah,
render will only return one thing.
yeah. And
Okay.
what render is
Okay.
saying is take the one function that you've sent me, whether it's a wrapper or a component, because again, these are the wrapper is also a function. It's just one that just says, hey, put all the stuff inside me together. But render is just saying, run the one function that you're giving me here, and whatever HTML gives you, put that on the page. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, so you can pass one into render or the function. It
Yeah.
has to be just one though, which makes
Yep.
sense.
Exactly.
So
Yeah. Yeah. Dane, did you have another question? Or did you have your hand up?
I'll have another one. I'll be on the first one.
Yeah, go for it.
So I said I don't, so we're good.
Oh, okay, great, great, great. Um, cool. Anything else before we move along? Awesome. So yeah, so we're gonna just return whatever our app component returns. So what is a component? A component is a function that has a name. It returns some HTML. Right? These are all functions that return HTML. It will take some arguments in the form of these parameters. There is, well, let me talk a little bit about what a component is for, right? One of the main things that is the thing that finally clicked it for me with React. Uh, yeah, I think this is actually in the yeah, it's actually in the curriculum later on. Um, I would put it very first thing, but this is the thing that made it really, really click for me in React is kind of the way that we put things together, right? Um, uh, for your project, I assume you had to do user stories and wireframes, mockups, and all that stuff. So React is really, really, really good at helping us implement the things that we've drawn, right? So if we've made a what is this, a shopping list uh, or a inventory, if we've said, cool, we want our little page to look like this or our component to look like this, we've got a little search thing, we've got a little checkbox, we've got a list of data that we're getting. Uh, how do we turn this into a web page? Uh, we could start by one way to do it is we could start by writing the HTML and kind of figuring out what we need from there. But the when we're at the sort of pen and paper stage, this is really useful for me. We have our component and we just draw boxes around stuff. HTML runs on a box model. There's ways to do stuff with CSS, but mostly all the stuff we're putting on the page is boxes within boxes within boxes. And so we can take our page and break it up into these boxes. Here's the whole thing. Here is our search bar. Here is the list of all the stuff. Here is the row. Here are the things inside the rows. So we can break each of those things down pretty granularly. And then we can just make those components. So our whole big thing here is a component. Our search bar is a component. Our product table is a component. I would probably make each one of these little things another component, but there's no right or wrong answer. It's just what works better for you. So here's a product category row. Here's each product row. And so these are things that we can write. We will write these as functions. We will put them in files. We'll import them where we need them. And we will use them inside our JSX to return stuff to our main thing. Yeah. So this was so incredibly useful for me because I've been wireframing HTML for a long time, but breaking it down into like, oh yeah, each one of these things is a component or a function in React really helps to kind of think about what I need to write to make all that happen. We're coming up on the hour, and that is a long time to sit and listen to me yammer about React. Let's take a 10-minute break and let your brains relax a little bit, get a drink of water, and we'll come back and talk about implementing all that stuff. Cool? Awesome. I will see you all in stop share. Hey, there's I'll see you all in 10. Ready. So let's yeah. Cool. Let me go back and share my screen again. And let's go back to looking at our components. So when you create a new React app, it's always going to have all this stuff in it. I'm going to pull some out, or a lot out, just so we can concentrate on here. Take all of that stuff out there. Since we're not using either of those, let's get rid of that logo. Here. That. Those. Not going to talk about testing just yet. So pull it out of. Great. Oh yeah, I pulled up the extra. Great. So thank you. Format. Be back to finals. Command Shift K, kill the line. Great. So we should be back to an empty app there. Fantastic. Just a couple of workflow things because I'm hitting a lot of keys here that you can't see. One of the things so start from here back. One of the cool things that happens with this, kind of like with live server, is that when you change your React here, when you change your stuff, it compiles with problems. It returns whatever return that. I forgot how to program. There we go. Wow, there's our hello. So when we change stuff in here, the React server here will automatically recognize those changes and re-render. One additional step that I've taken is in your VS Code, you can set in your settings, command comma will get you your settings. You can set your autosave, save. And I set my autosave to on focus change. So anytime I change windows, change screens, change anything, it'll automatically save for me. So that means I can make a change and then without saving, just change there and it'll automatically go. It automatically save for me. I never have to worry about like, oh, did I save that window or not? My hot take is that no modern application should have an explicit save. It should just auto save for you, but that's another talk altogether. Um, great. So basically, I have this auto save. You can see it's changed now. If I change Windows, blam, it saves and that updates for me. The other kind of workflow thing that I use all the time is the automatic formatter. So if I have, I have here, I have a paragraph that says some junk, and it's over here, and I have one that says some other stuff here. Div got all knocked over here. If I hit Command Shift F, it'll do a global find invoice. If I hit Option Shift F, if I look at it, I forget it. It needs to be muscle memory. Option Shift F will auto format stuff for me, which is super useful just to keep all your stuff in a consistent looking state, which helps you understand it better in the long run. Helps your teammates understand it. You maybe your teammate in the future. So yeah, I compulsively auto format with Option Shift F. That's on the Mac. On Windows, it should be something very similar. So yeah, great. So let's talk a little bit about. We talked a little bit about what components are. We talked a little bit about what goes into them and what they return and how they put stuff on our HTML page for us. talked a little bit about how each one can only return one thing. So we either need to have a wrapper div or preferably a fragment. Um, yeah, yeah, I think that's right. One of the kind of gotchas that I see folks say is that in general, they components should be capitalized, and that's just a convention. If I have a lowercase app like that, I'm just gonna have to import it from here, and I can import it as whatever I want. But if I import it as app, I just need to use lowercase app there, lowercase app there, and we can see that it's not defined. It's not defined. App is not defined. So it says, there it is. Make sure it's all in the same place. Just make sure, in fact, to avoid that, I just usually do export default up here. So that should give us our stuff back. In general, you will see components named uppercase. If it is lowercase, it works. It's just less obvious, and you'll get weird syntax highlighting stuff. You can also call it, dog sandwich, as long as you call it the same thing there. It should work fine. When you're importing a whole thing, when you're importing an export default, you don't have to call it the same thing. Generally, you want to, though, because you're going to be the one looking at it later. And if you don't remember what dog sandwich was when you were coding too late, you're going to have a problem. So in general, you will see components uppercased and called the same as their files. It is a convention. This is one of the benefits slash dangers of React being a library instead of a framework. In a framework, things need to be named the way they should be named, or else it won't work at all. React, you can name it whatever you like. But we have conventions so that it's easier to understand. Cool. So that's that. And yeah, and so we can kind of like we saw with that inventory list model, we can nest, and even as we saw with the default page there, we can nest components arbitrarily deep. So we can have an app there. We can have we can make a new component that's like app header, app main, terrible names for things, don't call them that. But we just need to import these and make them modules. So we would say import app header, make one here. So we make a new file called app header, JS, important, and export default function. And we can say return a nav since it's the header. Header. And we do the same thing with the app. Let's call it app body. Export the default. Paragraph. And then we just need to import it in our app. And call it that. Fantastic. Auto format and save. And so now we should be able to see, hey, there's our header, there's our body. Great. So we can nest stuff as deep as we want, as long as we're defining it and importing it. And again, these are all just functions, just like the other ones. Organizationally, you'll see a bunch of different things. Again, React is a library, so it doesn't really specify where things should be. You'll see that. You'll see, components, and then put all the components inside there, except for apps. Sometimes you'll see things broken down by by what they are, by what they do, by what part of the app is. There's a really great article slash talk by Dan Aronoff, who wrote React, about like what the proper organizational structure for your React application should be. And the short answer is the one that works for you. If you have a half dozen components sitting around and that makes sense, great. If you organize them by what part of the site they're on, great. If you organize them by these are buttons and these are drop downs, great. Whatever works for you. There's no right or wrong way to do it, just easier or harder. Dane, yeah, what's your question? If you're talking, you're muted.
For like app header and like app body, um, when you're importing app header from app header and app body from app body,
Mhm.
do you need to put them in the return div that you were showing below? Like, does that do
Um,
anything?
can you? I'm not sure I understand what you're asking. Can you ask that again?
Yeah, so you have import app header from the quote up there and
Mhm.
app body from app body.
Mhm.
Do you need in the div below, is that doing anything, or why wouldn't the import just work without the
Oh,
functionality from below?
great question. So let's look at app header. So app header is a module, JavaScript file, that is exporting this function. So when we import that, all we're doing here is we can look at it in our console log. We can everything's an object. A lot of things are objects in JavaScript, so we can actually just console log it. It's just the thing, right? Functions are first class objects, so we can console log app header and see that. Run it and look at the console. Here's our app header. App header is just a function. And that means that if we're not calling the function down here, it's not doing anything.
Got it. Okay, so it's just basically any functionality that was in app header.js. You're pulling that over into the functionality that is usable in app.js.
Yeah. And again, this is,
Okay.
basically this is running that function and then taking the
Yeah.
HTML it puts out and appending it to
Yeah.
the thing.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons why you want to do this is maybe we're psychotic and we have a bunch of headers here.
Mhm.
So we
Got
can
it.
run this function multiple times. We can use this component multiple times, so it doesn't automatically
Gotcha.
kick off. Does that make
Yeah, yeah.
sense?
And so you're importing app header from app header. And then
Mhm.
so if you didn't have that app header would in the div area would do nothing
Yeah, because
because
it
it's
wouldn't
not
be
actually able to read
defined,
any.
and we
Yeah,
get
it
an
wouldn't be
error
defined. It's
here.
not a defined function where you're
Yeah,
defining it. Okay.
yeah, exactly.
Okay. Okay. That makes sense. I was just a little bit lost there.
Yeah, and I don't know how much we touch on modules. I think we touch on it briefly, kind of in passing. Um, but JavaScript modules are really cool. You can do a lot of things with them. They don't have to be just functions or components. If I have, I have a file called, data.js or whatever, JJS. I can have that export default. I can have it export a like a constant. Uh, Good name. Dogs. Great. Um, let's do it this way so it's easy to read. We have a constant called dogs. That dogs is say a list of dogs. Spot Cerberus, and so on. If we export that dogs, we can import that dog list. Um, and then we can console log it in our function, right? So this is just JavaScript. we're just exporting JavaScript. And if we look at, oh, look, it rendered and showed us the data that we got here. And we could include this as our thing. So again, there's nothing magic about React doing this. You're literally just saying, hey, whatever you're exporting from this file, put it in this variable. And in this case, these variables happen to be functions. I find this incredibly useful. I use this all the time for like stuff like this. I'll have a data set that's in a file that I just import, or set of constants, or a lot of things. So really understanding how imports work in JavaScript is super, super powerful. And you can import stuff by name too. I'm not going to go into it all, but yeah. So this is just saying whatever's exported by default from app body, put it in this variable called app body. Just happens to be a function, and we can just happen to call that function there. Does that kind of answer what you're asking?
Yeah, but there's so much there.
There's so
That's
much
really
there.
I was saying on mute, like that's really cool, and there's I can see a lot of uses
Mm-hmm.
for that. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, there's just so much that's going
Yeah.
on within that whole thing.
Yeah.
Um,
Don't worry about it too much. Again, you can pattern match and get it to work. It, when there are bugs to solve later on, it'll be a thing to remember. And as you do more JavaScript, you'll start doing this more, and it'll become second nature
yeah,
or
there's a few things
easier.
that I've learned just in JavaScript that it's like, right, I can see the few couple spots that I would use this, but this is just one of those things that's like, all right, well, there's unlimited possibilities there.
Yeah, yeah, totally, totally. Lyra, you have a question?
Yeah. So when this might not be relevant or like applicable until way later or not at
Mm-hmm.
all, but you said that so like within this example for div and app header and app body, those are calling functions.
Mm-hmm.
Is Are there ways or is it a thing to be passing parameters or data sets into those function calls or
You are so good. That's exactly what I was going to talk about next. Thank you for the
oh
segue.
wow, okay. Cool.
Absolutely. Great. So yeah, there absolutely are. Fantastic catch. So um, the way we have it now is nice, but not super useful. It's always going to be the same every time, and we may as well just be writing static HTML. If we want to pass things in, we can. Like we said, properties here, if we have a class name or whatever, properties here are basically arguments to the function that you're calling here. And so in React, there's a special one called props. And uh, I've always hated the name props. I don't know why I have such a visceral reaction against it. But basically, you can take an argument to your function called whatever you want, but it's traditionally called props. That's not true. You have to call it props. But props will basically be an object, and that object will be uh, that object will be whatever you put in here that isn't like a built-in thing. So if I want to say, we'll call it content, and here's my content. Very important stuff. So content is going to be included in the props object that we're going to see. Let's take a look at that and close up that. So right now we're just returning whatever. Let's see what props looks like. So again, this is just a function that's running, and what it's returning is what's going to be on the page. But you can do it's just JavaScript at this point, mostly. So you can do whatever you want up here. So I can do a console log. I can just look at what props is here. Props format. Cool. So if I look at this and look at my console, hey, look at that. Props that I'm logging out here is this object that has right now one key that's content and that. I can add as many keys as I want. I can say content, and I can say description. And so when I look at it, hey, now I've got an object with two items, content and description. So I can use those in here. I can, since I have these props, I can say, hey, I'm going to say, here's an H2 that has, and here's where we saw it a little bit in the default, but I don't think we really called it out. We can include data from JavaScript. Whatever's inside these curly brackets, whatever value that has is going to be inserted, and that's important, and we'll see why in a second. Whatever value is in those brackets is going to be inserted into your HTML at that point. So we can say props description, and so we'll get a spice this up a little bit. We'll get an H2 put in our thing there that is that description. We can put in a paragraph here that has props, what's it, content. And so the thing that we're passing in here, and I'll often like break it out like this just to make it a little bit easier to read. So we have our app body component function. These things are being passed into an object called props, and this is part of the React magic. You have to know that. But anything that's not like one of the default things or one of the required things in an object is going to be put into props here. And so we can see that we have our object, content, and description. And look at this. Our H2 is taking props description and putting it there. Our H1 is taking props content, which we can see is that, and puts it there. So this is huge. We can take things from up here and we can put them in our components. So what that means for us is that I'm going to make this a little bit more readable. This is garbage. So I can use app body to display different kinds of content. I can say app body. I can say content equals this is the good stuff. I can say description is 15. Description is great. Close it off. Format. And so now I can use that same component with different values by passing different values in. So that's a way to customize your components, to use the same components to display different information, and how to pass things down there via, these are called props in React. Cool, right? And we can, like we saw before, we can use that any number of times. So pretty sweet. Starter questions about props. Yeah, Daniel, what's up?
Yeah, I had just question about like why you don't just put the app.js in the index.js, like that all that information.
Can you say that again? I think I know what you're asking about. I want to make sure.
Yeah, so like how you have in the apps.js, you make a function app, and then you like basically just return it in the index HTML index HJS. You return app there. Why can't you do that? Like, why do you need the apps.js to do that instead of just putting it in the index.js?
Oh, so just
like
taking
that functionality,
taking the
like
stuff and doing that, right?
like taking that function and putting it in, so you don't have to export it and default and all that stuff.
So you're asking if why don't we just do like that?
No, like the information in the apps.js, how like because you're still like, why don't you import app header from app header in index HTML, index.js, and then call app header in the return that's in the index.js? Like, why do you have a separate tab or of JavaScript that does this extra stuff?
I'm still not sure exactly what you're asking. So why am I not bringing these into index.js?
Yeah, and then running that function there instead of.
Yeah, there's So yeah, so it sounds like what happens if we do this, and what
Yeah, and then
happens
put
if
the
we
app header
take
in
that
like
stuff
inside the render.
like that, right?
No, just like the app header and app body instead of inside that div. Or
Oh
does it
yeah,
need the
just
div?
doing yeah, just doing this.
Yeah.
Yeah. No reason. We can totally do that. I mean, there are reasons. Um, we can totally do that. Uh, so the one reason is convention. Um, if you're looking at someone's React application, this is pretty much what the index is going to look like. So you know that there's going to be a component named app, and that lowercase index.js. It's kind of like separating the functionality of attaching something to the DOM and what the application is actually doing. Um, there's no reason technically to not put that in there. You totally can. Um, but this allows us to cleanly say, okay, this is the part where I'm messing with the HTML and hooking stuff up. This is where the actual application actually starts. So it's more of a conceptual thing, more of a organizational thing than a technical thing, if that makes sense. Does that answer what you were asking?
Yeah. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. Yeah. You can again. It's a library. You can do it with however you want. You can put you can put everything in index.js if you want. It'll totally work. When you come back to your project 6 months later, um, you will probably be very mad at your past self for doing that. Especially once it gets past, oh, here's a thing with a couple tags inside it. Once you get to an actual application with dozens of components and stuff all over the place, um, the more, and again, there's a degree to which there's a line you can pass. But generally, when stuff is componentized like that, it's going to be easier to conceptualize. Again, there's no right or wrong in programming, only what works better or worse. And so if it works better for you to put all your stuff in index, knock yourself out. It's still going to work. I recommend trying this convention out and seeing. But also, I recommend playing around with it. Worst thing that's going to happen is that the app is not going to work or that you're going to be confused for a little bit. I think experimentation is, I encourage experimentation over following convention if you don't understand what's going on. And maybe you'll come up with a different convention that works better for you. But yeah, as long as it works, rule one, you're good. Dane, what's up?
I just wanted to ask you this before I forgot, and this is something you can definitely circle back on, but
Mhm.
I was just curious about, we've only worked with pretty much one page index JSs.
Yeah.
I can see myself getting completely lost
Mhm.
in flipping between. Is there a way that you stay organized or like an organization way where I'm like not like because like I'm importing app body to app to index.js. I can see how this like chain
Mhm.
gets long really quickly and it's not all one page where I can just like scroll up and look at it. Do
Yeah.
you have anything like that?
Yeah. And so again, this is a conceptual thing. If you wanted to, you could put it all on one page. Um, Once your app gets to be past a certain very small size, that's going to be less useful to you. And keeping like I generally say like if my component is longer than one screen, I need to probably prefactor it and break it down a little bit more. So I can see everything that's happening in that component on one screen. The trade-off of that, like you said, is I can't really see everything that's going on everywhere. And hopefully, if we've broken down our app ahead of time and we say like, oh, here's our app, here's our body, here's our header. Um, we can kind of keep track of where stuff is. But one of the cool things about componentizing things like that is that you you learn to start trusting your abstractions. So, if I would probably not put these more than one app body in there. I'd probably have an app body with things in it. And so I can look at my main app and say like, oh, I have a header component, I have a body component, I have a footer component. That's what my page looks like. Then I can go into my body component and say, oh, I have a sidebar here, I have some things here, and those are the only things in my body. If I need a shopping cart component, I can just look at that and not worry about the context. And that's one of the design elements of React that takes getting used to, I think, is, and this is hard to hear and understand. You really need to get your fingers dirty doing it. Um, a component should not care about anything outside of itself. The app body, it takes props, it returns some HTML. It should not care anything about where that app body is being used in the application. It should not care about where those props are coming from. It should not care about any of that. It just knows I have a job that I'm doing. I'm going to do it. And so that really lets once you get to dozens of pages with dozens and dozens of components, that allows you to really focus on the thing that you're working on instead of kind of getting lost in the spaghetti of everything. It also lets you work with multiple people so that you are only working on the shopping cart. Don't worry about where it is, how it's getting its data, anything. You're getting this data and you're displaying it this way. And that's all you have to worry about. But again, that said, you can throw everything all in one file if you want to. Again, I encourage experimentation. You will definitely find out that is going to be real difficult to work with after a short time. Or maybe not. If it works for you, amazing. That's just my recommendation. Does that kind of
Yeah,
get
like I said,
what you're thinking? Yeah.
I just never done it before outside.
Yeah.
We've only been exposed to one page documentation.
Yeah.
And I just don't know how intuitive it is to nest anything like that. What you say makes sense.
Yeah.
Just like also kind of sticking to the plan and the wireframe. So
yeah. And honestly, you won't really get a feel for that until halfway through project week. I don't think. It really takes kind of getting in and messing around with it and feeling like, oh, this is, I'm confused. As soon as you get confused, start looking at ways to make it easier to understand. Um, programming is complex, but it doesn't need to be complicated. So it's the great thing about what we do here. We're not welding or building tables or whatever. Like, we can write some stuff, and if we don't like it, we can just copy paste it somewhere else, refactor it, and it's a different thing. The medium that we work in is really flexible. It's really amenable to experimentation and modification. So my recommendation is fool with stuff until you find a way that works for you. There are a lot of recommended ways and best practices that have worked for a lot of people. They might not work for everyone, but they're a good start. So try different things and see what works for you. This is one way to do it. It's not the only way to do it.
Sweet.
Cool. Any other kind of questions in that area?
If you say the best practices are recommended primarily because I'm imagining that like a couple months down the road, let's say we get our first junior dev job and we are sitting in a meeting looking at code with a senior dev and they go, oh, you didn't do this a certain way, but you should do this. Are a lot of these best practices sort of like, hey, when you get your job, they're going to want you to do this?
Yeah, and the funny thing is, like, they're going to be different across jobs too. I've definitely I worked at a place that does stuff this way, and they're adamant about it. And I go to my next place, and they're going to be like, "Oh no, we name things differently, or we put stuff in a different place, or we, profile stuff this way." And the job's what's paying us, and we live in capitalism, so we do what we have to do for that job. And more importantly, money, job, capital aside, we're going to be working with other people. And, I might have a certain way I like to format my files or name my variables or whatever. But if I'm working with a team of a dozen other people who already have an established way of doing things, it's going to be beneficial if I adopt those conventions to make the entire group work better, instead of being like, well, I never use semicolons, so I'm never going to put a semicolon, or I always indent my things 4 spaces instead too. That's just a good way to make everyone mad at you and make work harder. So work is already hard enough, no reason to make it harder. And that's like super side tangent here. Programming attracts people with egos, 100%. It attracts smart people or people who think they're smart. And along with that comes a lot of the way that I'm doing it is the right way, and I have good reasons to do it. And it took me years and years to drop that ego. And instead of thinking the way that I did stuff is the best way to do stuff, recognize that there are many different ways to get the same thing accomplished, and that getting along with a group in this context is going to be a lot better in the long run. Then, so form strong opinions, have certain ways that you like to do things for sure, 100%, because you'll be working alone a lot of time, but I'll hold on to those loosely. And as a junior dev, people are going to be telling you this is the way things are. Same thing applies to them. They have opinions. They have ways they like to do things. Listen to them. If you have to work with them, use them. If they don't work for you, don't use them in your personal work, for sure. Yeah. But on the flip side of that, you are also a person who has understanding of things. And if you go to a place, this definitely happened to me too, where I go to a place, they've done something a certain way for the last decade, and I'm like, oh, well, I've been doing it this way for the last few years and it seems to work out pretty well. They can either say, nope, this is the way the standard is, it's going to happen that way, or they might be like, oh yeah, let's give that a shot and see if it works. And it may or may not work, and you contribute to the culture. Yeah, so have opinions, form opinions, have reasons for those opinions, express those opinions, but also do whatever makes the work easy, because work is already hard. Huge tangent. Did that get at any of what you're asking?
No, that was great. That was great. That was a great TED Talk.
Cool. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. Yeah, I have so much more to say, but let's talk about props a little bit first. I'm happy to go into old man major time anytime. What more do we want to say about props? So yeah, so we can components are generalized pieces of code that we can send information to customize for the purposes that we want to do that. Wireframes a little bit. Yeah. Yeah. So when we pass in these props, there's a few different, two main things I want to get through, I think. When we pass in these props, this is just an object, and you may or may not have played with a lot of the cool new, in quotes, in heavy quotes, JavaScript object stuff. A lot of this is taught as new stuff. It is new as of 2015. So take that as you will. One of the quote unquote new things is something called destructuring, which is super rad. So this is an object. Objects look like a key value and so on. Body, great, thanks. One of the cool things we can do in JavaScript now is destructure an object. So if this is a bigger component, we're going to be writing props this, props that, props the other thing, and it gets a little tedious. So one of the cool things we can do is say we can destructure these, which means that we're going to, it looks like an object. This is just the syntax though. We can pull them out and say, we can say, oh, I'm going to make a variable called description. I'm going to make a variable called content. And I'm going to say that's props. And so now what that does, and you're going to see this in a couple different ways and a couple different places. We are creating a variable that has the same name as the key in this object and assigning the value from that object to this variable. So if we have a key in this object called description, this will assign it to a variable of the same name. Same thing for content. So now instead of saying props description, props content, props image, props blah blah blah, we could just use the more concise variable names here. And unless I'm lying, that should look exactly the same. Let me just be sure. Great. So that is a fun thing to do. I think it makes it easier to read, so I will generally do it in pretty much every component. Again, your mileage may vary. The other way that you can use destructuring, yeah, Dane first.
Yeah, so that's just the order that they're in. So description content doesn't have anything to do with how you named them on the previous one. It's just the
Um,
first prop will pass through descriptions and the second prop
oh, great
will pass through
question.
content.
Yeah, no, keys and objects don't have any intrinsic order. So they can be in any order there and they'll still work.
Okay. And but
Um,
the lower level will see description and content as description and content, or are you just assigning it one and two as it's passed through?
so yeah, great question. So objects don't have any order in them. So we can make these any order we want in the destructure. And this is equivalent to saying,
Okay, gotcha.
yeah, so that's exactly the same as saying that.
Okay.
And these can be in any order you want because they're
Yeah,
objects.
so I guess a part of where my confusion is coming is how it's getting passed down
Mhm.
backwards. I'm still not sure exactly. Like, I get that it's happening. I'm not sure
Yeah.
exactly how that's happening.
Yeah. So the only like magic part is that it's called props. So anytime you're passing parameters in one of these element looking things, it takes these and puts them into an object that looks like whatever's in there. Whatever's in there. So it's going to take these things from your element or your it, it's basically taking those arguments from the function you're running. And one of the things that React does is it takes those and puts them into an object. And this object internally is called props. That's the name it gives you. So when you, am I lying? I might be lying. Let's find out. Um, it creates an object and it passes it to the function. Can the function be called anything? Or the, I think, yeah, because, oh yeah, because JavaScript doesn't have, it's just passing the first parameter there is an object. So by convention, we call it props. It can be called giraffe, as long as we're calling it the same thing, it's going to work. But
Okay.
traditionally, we're going to call it props. Props.
Okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
that
So
that makes sense. So it's just the functionality of when you call of the props itself.
yeah.
So
So
okay, so yeah, yeah.
yeah.
I
So
think I think I'm following. I'm still not completely all the way there, but
yeah,
it's
yeah.
good enough.
It's Monday. It's day one of React. You have plenty of time to get it. So basically, it takes anything you put here, breaks it into key value pairs, creates an object, and then passes that object as the first argument to your function, and then you can pull the stuff out of that. And the cool thing about React, so this is the number one cool thing about React, I think. So you notice this. And this is partly because Douglas is not defined. Oh yeah, clearly. Let's log out props in here. Um, this is happening because of the dev, but um, see it's logging it out twice. Um, actually, that's a bad example. Forget I was saying this. When variables change, so we're going to talk about state later. But basically, when you have data, when that data changes, it's going to re-render all this stuff. So if the stuff you're passing to here changes, it's going to re-render it and show the new stuff. And so that's the cool thing about using props, is that when the data in a parent component changes that's being passed down, it takes that new data and re-renders it here. You'll learn about that probably tomorrow or the next day, but just keep that in mind as when you're passing data down. That's And again, this is the only thing that this cares about. It doesn't care about where it is in here, how many other components are in it, how it's getting that data. It's just taking the stuff you got, putting it in props, and you can pull that out and use it anywhere.
So it's a the what's actually the props is on apps, not props is just a placeholder. So the content description, those are the props,
Yeah, those are the
which
props.
has all the functionality of being passed backwards. That's what I wasn't connecting the dots of yet. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. The only thing that's not consistent, the only thing that matters is what you call the keys. So if you're passing content down, you need to pull content out of the props object. Yeah. The last cool trick, I think, about destructuring, you can do it like this, totally great. I do it all the time. You can also destructure right in there. So this way you don't need to worry about what you're calling this object. You're saying, hey, object, put those keys into these variables. Props doesn't exist anymore. And so now we're just grabbing those straight from there. Saves a little bit of real estate up here. Once you know what they are up there, I think it's easier to read. But again, all of these ways are good. You can destructure it this way. You can destructure it that way. You can, just take props and say props description, props content. All of these things totally work. They're morally equal. Just use whichever one works for you the best. Some people will say things about efficiency. If you're using JavaScript, it's very rare that you're going to need to worry about that. So the more important thing is that, rule one, make sure it works. Rule two, make sure that it's easy to understand and think about. And then after that, worry about making it fast or efficient. If you're worried about making something fast, we'd be programming in C or assembly. JavaScript, not so much. Cool. Let's talk about anything else. Any questions about this before I show you one last cool trick? Awesome. Remember I said stuff in curly braces needs to be of value. There are two kinds of things in JavaScript, two kinds of statements. There are statements and expressions. Expressions return values. A statement, if blah, 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 do stuff, that is a statement. This does not return any value. A while loop, a for loop, don't return values. So if you put an if or a while in there, nothing's going to show up. What you need to do is figure out a way to turn a list of things into a list of components. And hey, we can do that. And you'll see this more. This is just a teaser for next time. What method or function in JavaScript can turn an array into a different array of the same size?
Dot map, I believe.
Dot map, you are correct. Get used to dot map, dot filter, dot sort, reduce if you want to be real fancy. But map, filter, sort are going to be your super best friends in React. So we want to take, oh, hey, look, we have this dog list. This dog list has, what does it have in it? Data. This is an array of 3 strings. So I'd like to take that array of 3 strings and turn it into 3 components. So I've got dog list here. I'm going to take dog list. and I'm going to run a map on it. And I'm going to say, for each dog, we want to return an app body. And we have a header. I'm just going to put the header as whatever. Uh, Header is dog. And then the description. Oh, no, sorry, that's wrong. The description is going to be dog. And then the content is going to be the dog that we're getting out of the array. And we need to put that in curlies as well. We're going to need a key in there, but you'll learn about keys later. But for now, the important part is we're turning this list of strings into a list of components that uses the stuff from those strings in those components. And if I've done everything correctly, hey, look, we have 3 components that do that thing. And if I add more dogs here, data changes and we should get a new dog there. So you're going to be using this an awful lot, taking a list of data and turning it into a list of components using map. This is just a little preview, a little teaser. Yeah, you'll definitely learn more about that tomorrow and in the days to come. I think that is where we will leave off. We've been here for 2 hours, and that is more than enough for anyone. Yeah, open for questions before we head out. Anything that you'd like a little bit more explanation about, or anything at all, in fact.
Not a technical question,
Yeah.
but would you be willing to DM a campaign for our cohort?
Oh
So
my God, I would love this.
I put you on the spot.
no, interesting subject in that sentence. Or no, verb, I guess. I'm willing to GM a session. I don't really play D&D anymore. I played it twice this year. But there are so many other good games. No one should ever be playing D&D anymore. I'm happy to run. I'm happy to be running a game. Yeah. I have a lot of strong opinions about Dungeons and Dragons. I've played. No, it's the same thing. We have both kinds, country and Western. Um, I played D&D since 1983, and there are better games to play, much better. If you want a dungeony kind of thing,
what are your top couple? Do you have a list, like a small list that you'd recommend?
I have a big list
of games.
I can post. I have a Medium article I wrote that was from a couple years ago. That's like my game sommelier list that's changed in the last couple of years. I'm running 3 games right now, I think, weekly. My Monday night game, which we're starting to wrap up, is called Public Access. It's basically like a creepy pasta mystery solving supernatural game. Super fun. On my Thursday game, I'm going to start up Slug Blaster, which is a game where you play teenagers with sci-fi hoverboards that do stuff across dimensions. The subtitle is Kickflip Over a Quantum Centipede. Super fun. And then my Wednesday game I'm playing in is called Night Witches, where we're playing female Russian bomber pilots in World War II that had crappy planes and who were amazing. And it's a story about them. I've played a lot of games. I think I've played almost 160 games this year in about 40 different systems. Only one of which was D&D. I played two D&Ds. So yeah, I'm happy to talk about that at length. I'm happy to run stuff anytime. Tell me what kind of experience you want to have, and I can probably find a game that is right for you.
Awesome. Well, I would love that Medium article, and then we can go from there. That'd be great.
Yeah, I'll post that in the I bet I can find it right now. Let's see, Medium. I'm on Medium. There's a lot of boring stuff on there, but there's also a lot of good stuff. Let's see, where are my stories? My stories are there. Published stories are there. Yeah, this is a quick cut and paste one. I'm going to post it in the Zoom chat. If anyone watching this on YouTube later wants to find it, look me up on Medium. Yeah, this is a few years out of date, but it gives a kind of overview of what is available. definitely worth updating. Yeah, cool. Think about what you like, and I'm
Awesome.
happy to run something for some folks. Cool. And with that, I think we are done. I'm gonna turn off the recording, say goodbye to the internet.